folks join. And if you could, please introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know who we have with us. Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in just another moment. Please, in the chat, if you would, introduce yourselves, share who you are, where you're coming from. Thanks. Welcome, everyone. I love seeing everyone's names pop up. This is wonderful. All right, so 2 minutes after the hour, we'll start on time. I'm so glad you all have joined us today. I see lots of friends and neighbors in the chat popping up. Please do continue to introduce yourself. Today, we're going to be sharing research on the experiences of students who changed or delayed their education plans in response to the pandemic, and what those students, the high school classes of 2020 and 2021, say will help reconnect them to their post-secondary pathway. On the call, you have 3 of the researchers. You have me, Elaine Lee, Melissa Levitt, and standing by in the chat, you also have Nicole Torpey-Sabo. And we are joined today by a wonderful panel. We have Elvin Buku, who is the Deputy Director for the Foundation for Tacoma Students, Xenia Henderson, who's the Director of Member and Partner Engagement for NCAN, the National College Attainment Network, and Tamikia Legrand, who's Vice President for Strategy, Enrollment Management, and Student Success at Virginia Commonwealth University. So here's how the session will roll. It's a little bit different from our usual public viewpoints, where we really want to jump to the good stuff, to the conversation as quickly as possible. So we're going to share some quick context up front, but really get to what we learned and how we can act in the discussion. So the researchers will share the findings in a more conversational way. And as we go, please feel free to chime in the chat. We have both, as I said, Nicole Torpey-Sabo and also Carrie Sampson, our colleagues, as well as others from the research team who are ready, willing, and able to answer any questions you have. We've posted the slides online, and then also we'll provide links to the report. So, setting some quick context. I'm sure all of us on this call believe in the promise of higher education, particularly how the right education beyond high school is the key to economic opportunity and mobility, so we can build thriving lives and meaningful careers. In the decade leading up to the pandemic, we were making progress, slow and steady progress overall on attainment, but significant gaps by race were persistent and were not closing. What you can see here is, while overall we're at 43.8%, you have white folks who are age 25 to 64, with about 1 in 2 of us have a post-secondary degree. That number is not the same for Blacks, Hispanics, American Indians, and Alaska Natives. And those lines are just so stubbornly staying flat. So we knew we had a serious problem in terms of educational equity. Then the pandemic hit and all the disruptions it brought with it. Along with the healthcare and all the other disruptions, it deeply impacted people's plans for education. Our Strata Public Viewpoint research showed that more than 1/3 of US adults who are aged 18 and older either changed or canceled their education plans as a result of the crisis. And higher ed enrollments reflected the disruption. Overall, fall 2020 enrollments were down 4.5 times the pre-pandemic declines. And I'm sure nobody on the call is surprised by that. But what is really important to notice is how that disruption affected people so differently. The disruptions were not at all evenly distributed, just like the other effects of the pandemic. So the direct college rates from high poverty schools fell almost 4 times more than at low poverty schools, you can see in the chart. And schools that serve higher shares of students of color, those also dropped at twice the rate than those who are serving lower shares of folks of color in their schools. Additionally, those steep enrollment declines did not get better in spring. The disruptions continued and deepened. And again, that disruption continues to be unevenly distributed. So spring 2021 enrollment dropped by 5% over the previous spring among 18 to 24-year-olds. That doesn't actually sound that bad, 5%, 5 in 100, but that decline translates into 500,000 fewer students who are starting their post-secondary education journeys. And when you look at the institution type, here you have public 2-year and 4 years, you see that the enrollment declines for young adults at community colleges were particularly steep, dropping 13% as compared with what happened at the public 4 years. And why does this matter? Community colleges traditionally serve more low-income students and students of color. So at Strata Research, we really wanted to understand what's happening here and how to respond to the crisis, particularly this looming equity crisis where things weren't going well, but we have this risk of the young people who are not making the jump over to post-secondary education, who are changing or canceling their plans, being lost, taking too long to get back. And we all know that that spells a lot more difficulty in the future. So what we did was a 3-phased approach starting this spring. We really wanted to tap into these learners, these high school students who graduated 2020, 2021. So we started with folks who had been planning to go to school and who changed or disrupted their plans, delayed their plans. What we did is we started with a big survey, a nationally representative survey. If you were on our June webinar, we shared the results of those. And then we wanted to go deeper. So over the course of June and July this summer, we did a set of online discussion boards with 17 students, and then hour-long in-depth interviews with 12 students. And these again are the students who had been on track, but who changed and delayed their plans. What we wanted to understand from them, because they're the ones experiencing it, and there's so much to be learned from a learner-centric approach, is what were their experiences, and also what would be meaningful in connecting them back to their paths, and how can higher ed respond now, given all that? So let's start with what we heard. Let's start with the students and their voices. I wanted to start with a video that really summarizes and gives you some sense of what we heard from students.
How I put it, it was that one factor, and then it spiraled into a whole bunch of other factors, because during the pandemic, it really just made you sit down and think about this and think about that and think about all these things that were happening around me. And it was just, instead of getting better, it was getting worse.
It definitely took a year off of me going to school. You know, it's going to take me an extra year to get those classes done. You know, it took a huge toll on me, you know, mentally and emotionally.
I think it was definitely disrupted. I know it was disrupted, but I know the mindset that I have now and the mindset I had in the beginning of the pandemic are like 2 separate mindsets. I was way like not motivated at all or determined at all to you know, like move forward or go to college or anything like that. But then I realized it's more to the picture than that. Like I can't just be stuck in this whole.
The benefit in not going to a university immediately or not doing that right after high school, it is, I have more time to think. I have more time to really give thought to what I want to do in my future. It's a great benefit, and this is definitely having that time to really confidently figure something out.
Pandemic, was a time for solitude for me. So it's changed a whole lot of things for me. Changed the way I think about a whole lot of things. I knew that I came to accept that anything is possible. Yeah, you just have to discipline yourself and work towards something.
So that's introduce our panelists, because I know there are people on this call who spend all day, every day talking to students, probably texting with them late at night. There are people on this call who never get to talk to students, never have the privilege of hearing their voices and knowing what they're experiencing. Could we start with having the panelists introduce themselves and share how you work with students, what you're hearing from students? I'll start with Elvin.
How you doing? Thank you, Janet. Happy to be here with everyone. Yeah, Elvin Buku. I'm with the Foundation for Tacoma Students, which is the backbone organization to what we call the Graduate Tacoma Movement, which is 350 different community partners, institutions, families working together for student success. My background is primarily youth development. So I spent about 18 years in direct service in community-based organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs of King County and Puget Sound down here in Washington. I work now for the Foundation for Tacoma Students, which is much more into systems change, policy, funding, things of that nature. But happy to be here, share some experiences with y'all.
Great. Xenia?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Xenia Henderson, the Director of Member and Partner Engagement at the National College Attainment Network, lovingly known as NCAN. And at NCAN, we are a member-based organization. And so we work with a little over 600 programs and organizations across the country who work with young people in a range of settings, community-based organizations, high schools, scholarship programs, et cetera. And so we really have the advantage of hearing from them sort of what's happening on the ground with their young people and have a great national perspective and regional perspectives around, what's happening to students in rural areas, and a range of other ways that we understand sort of what's happening to our young people and what's been happening with them throughout the pandemic. So eager to share what we know, and a shout out to all of our great NCAN members that are actually joining us here today. So thanks.
Great. And Tamikia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Janet and team. I'm excited to be here. My name is Tamikia LeGrand. I am the Vice President for Strategy, Enrollment Management, and Student Success at Virginia Commonwealth University. Just to share a little bit of information about Virginia Commonwealth University, we're an urban public institution with about 29,000 students. About 52% of our students are minority students from minority backgrounds. About 30% of our students are Pell eligible, and a third of our students are the first in their families to attend college. So we serve a really diverse student population. And I think, connected to the slide that Janet showed earlier, the students who were most significantly impacted by the pandemic and how we chose to move through that as an institution really resonates with me and the students that we serve. But I think the other thing I would share with you is that at VCU, we've been laser focused on increasing our graduation rates overall. And so our graduation rates have improved 14% since 2012. And we have nearly eliminated the graduation gap between our low-income students, our African-American and Latinx students and their peers. And so, as we continue to move through this pandemic, we continue to be laser focused on that. And so I'm interested in the conversation today and excited to be here with everyone.
Great. And I know you have lots of things to share in how we can act that part of the conversation. Let me introduce our Strata researchers. And the way we wanted to do that was to have them to give us a quick overview from the findings from the report. Elaine, I was wondering if we could start with you and have you share what the broad trends were that you found in your analysis and synthesis of what we heard from students.
Sure, and thanks for the question, Janet. So hi, everyone. My name's Elaine Lee, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at Strata. But in other previous lives, I was a middle school teacher and a college access counselor and program manager in Philadelphia before deciding to continue my studies around understanding structural barriers related to post-secondary access and completion. So it's been nice to return to a project that has allowed me to reflect on the experiences with students I've worked with and with the students that took part in this current study. So I think there are really three broad findings to highlight here. So first, given the disruption and uncertainty created by the pandemic, students really underscored their desire for more concrete guidance on all fronts. So despite technology tools or various online resources at their disposal, students really still wished for that comprehensive and individualized attention in navigating their paths. The role of advisors and counselors really couldn't be more important for these groups. Second, likely not surprising to anyone here, we heard time and again how concerns over finances really drove students' decisions to postpone their plans. Faced with personal financial barriers alongside the thought of online learning and the uncertainty of more shutdowns during their first year of college, students were opting to delay, deciding to work and save money as well. Third, we noted that while students and educators have long realized the importance of connecting what's taught in the classroom to the practicalities of a career, students are really taking this moment in their lives to reassess the ways they want post-secondary education to serve them. So for most of our students, that meant a tighter connection between their learning and what they see themselves doing one day, and wanting an education that will allow them to plan, pivot, and prepare for a changing world, given how much the world was changing literally in front of their eyes over the last year and a half. So to bring the student voices back in, we have a clip of 7 different students really discussing these different elements of what they need to reconnect in a little bit more detail. And I would just have everyone tune into, really how students are discussing their needs around these broad themes, around the need for guidance, the need to support the financial barriers to going to college, and connecting college to career.
Be nice to actually give students the opportunity to actually explore on themselves and actually make the decision based on oneself.
Be open-minded and listen to the student and what they are considering for their future, but to be considerate of like everything that they share, but to really give them options.
When you have help all the time and you can always ask for help when you're doing something on your own, it's kind of like discouraging when you don't really know what you think you know.
It was so difficult. Like I remember me and all my friends like trying to figure it out, and we were doing it, and like I had to teach them like, oh look, you gotta do this so you could like move on to the next step. It's stupid. It shouldn't have been that hard. But there was nothing in person, and everything was online. They had no people to like contact these people interested in the classes.
I would actually want someone to just tell me to move on, someone to motivate me, never to relent, never to stop. Someone that could speak courage to me. And also, if possible, assist me financially.
I hopefully not like an unpaid internship, because I know that those are hard. But like an internship that would relate to my field specifically of genetics would be great.
I want to know that I have the security in that school, that if I need extra help, or if that it's certain that this career that I want, I'll be able to graduate and get that career.
I want to be able to say, oh, if one career doesn't work out or something I learned about and it doesn't work out how I wanted to, I still have knowledge about another career, so that I can, not be feeling like I'm stuck in one tunnel.
Thanks, Elaine. And Melissa, rounding us out and finally getting everybody in the room, can you introduce yourself and add to those findings?
Yeah, thanks, Janet, and thanks everyone for joining us today. It's great to be here and discussing this research with this amazing panel that we have. So I am one of the research directors here at Strata, and one of the co-authors of the report we're talking about. And my recent work for the past 6 months or so has really been all focused on how to re-engage and reconnect learners whose education has been disrupted. So we've looked at different student populations, different education pathways. And so for this group of recent high school grads we're looking at and listening to, there are really a few themes that stand out and I think kind of underscore, I think, some of the ideas that are coming out in the video that we just heard. One is a focus on what I would call relevance and risk. I am really struck by the level of scrutiny that students are bringing to their college and career planning. They're absolutely staying focused and committed to their goals. And at the same time, they're really sort of reimagining and reconfiguring the pathway that they'll now need to take to reach those goals. And I think that's because they're reevaluating the relevance of whatever decisions they were considering way back before the pandemic began. They're really trying to figure out if those are still relevant options. And given, of course, that we are all operating and they are operating and coming of age in this era of enormous uncertainty, like Elaine mentioned, they are very focused on mitigating risk. And I think mitigating financial risk is a part of that, but it's really also mitigating the risk of making the wrong decision more broadly. And so when we think about the kinds of supports and services that they're saying that they need, that they just spoke to in that video, we sort of think about that in three different areas. And in the report, we go into a lot more detail about that and have a lot of student voices speaking to these. And those areas are really guidance, resources, and connection to career. But I think a really important point to keep in mind, of course, is that those overlap. There's a tremendous amount of integration and cross-functionality when those services and supports and resources are provided to students. I mean, none of those will work in isolation. And I think that for the students we spoke with, that thread that's really bringing them all together is this focus on career. When they're talking about personalized guidance, it is guidance to show them career pathways and introduce them to mentors and other folks who have taken those pathways. When they're talking about removing financial barriers, it's really with an eye toward how do I make the right financial decision now so I don't derail my career and derail my future before it even begins. And I think when they are talking about connection to career, it is so concrete, it is so specific. They're focusing on, how can we bring the world of work into the college experience? We heard Jamie in the video say that she wants an internship, and she's specific about wanting a paid internship, which is a really important point. We spoke with other students who are already thinking about what kinds of skills training or skills certifications will I need on top of the degree that I'm getting. And I think the last point I would make, Janet, in response to your question, is to carry this sort of thread of career a bit further, and just to really highlight that when these students are talking about career preparation and preparing for that career journey, it's not a one-time event that they're thinking about. That's not the way they're thinking about it at all. We really heard them talk about needing a backup plan, needing to pivot, and that really stood out to me. And we heard someone in the video talking about that. If this career doesn't work out, what do I do? They really, I think, have that fear that what they're going to try the first time might not work out. And I think that fear is not unfounded, given what we've all been through and what they may have experienced and seen their families experience in the past year and a half. So I think the key idea there is just really that students are looking to college to help them make that connection to their job, to that first job, but it's also much more they're looking to college to really say, how can you help me navigate this entire career journey, which could very well be filled with some ups and downs and some unexpected turns.
Yes, thank you. There are definitely clear themes that emerge from the research. And then, it's always a journey where you have the big themes and then you start to see how things talk to each other within those themes. I'm wondering, Elvin, with your taking such a systems change approach to connecting students, how does this resonate, what students are saying with what you're hearing from the students and the organizations serving students?
Yeah, absolutely. Resonates strong. I mean, I'm not going to say that all communities are dealing with the same issues, but there are definitely similar themes here in Tacoma, Washington. So to frame it a little bit, Graduate Tacoma movement started in 2010 in result of a really low high school graduation rate, 55%. In 10 years, we've increased that to 89%. But in that same time period, post-secondary completion rates, post-secondary enrollment rates have stayed flat, if not decreased. And disparity gaps have increased just by a hair. And so I say that because a lot of the partners in refocusing towards the next 10 years, that's why we're doubling down on this post-secondary completion enrollment, but we're adding the why, right? Like to the point of everybody, the research that y'all have done, you need to center the career, economic mobility, success in life post college completion or certificate completion. And that's what we're hearing here is it resonates with the why, both for students and families, especially first generation students who it's the whole cost benefit, the risk assessment thing. When you think about the price of post-secondary degrees, right, compared to the careers that they would be entering into, some don't have the luxury of exploring that option. Right. And I'm thinking specifically about our families who are impoverished or students of color just in general. So what we're hearing about from a systems approach are our institutions, our organizations, not just in education, but in healthcare and in housing and in all the basic needs types of systems. Are we all speaking about this goal in the same way? Are we all thinking about economic mobility in the same way? Do we have the same definitions? We're dealing with cultural elements. Some first generation students never thought that was an option pre-pandemic. Definitely not thinking about it during the pandemic. And is it even relevant after? So on and so forth. So our organization is responsible for driving a lot of those conversations, convening the right folks, including students. And I can talk about our Student Voice Research Project a little bit later, but we're resonating with a lot of the themes here. There has to be a why behind why post-secondary enrollment and completion is important. And folks like us, direct service providers, families, parents, need to be speaking about it in the same way.
Yeah, and I'll invite panelists to just jump in as we go. But Xenia, how does it resonate with you? Because you are first-gen students.
Yeah, yes. So I myself, as a first generation college grad, really take to heart the work that our NCAN members do across the country and working with students who, I can relate to. I'm going to take it back a little bit and start sort of from the, we can't talk about access to post-secondary attainment without talking about persistence and completion, right? And to Elvin's point, students need support networks once they enter college. We can't do a great job at getting them into college and then offering them no support. And so I really appreciated hearing the student voices and the need for, I'm a person, I have these other things in life going on. It's not just about coming in and showing up to class. Sometimes I might not be able to show up to class because I was up all night dealing with some family emergency thing, right? And as simple as that may sound, I think a lot of adults at institutions and in different places forget to be empathetic, right, to just life in general. I mean, we found it in our own professional lives, right? We realized like, oh, wow, I need to now excuse myself because my kids are screaming in the background, right, working remotely. And so we really had to lean into our empathy, into our vulnerability to really understand people as individuals. And that's really what I'm hearing here from these young people about, I've got life going on. It's not just about what course to take. And so I think from the perspective of our NCAN members, who leverage things like technology and artificial intelligence and chatbots and all of those things, they even that out with the relationship. Right. And that's really what needs to happen is, when I think about institutions and think about academic advisors, let's make them whole life advisors, right? Let's make them some kind of other thing that really addresses beyond the academics, because we're hearing the need for assistance with finances, assistance with mental wellness, with life. Somebody chatted a really great note in here about just like life skills, what we used to call soft skills. Life skills, life preparation, motivation, as we heard from one of the young men in the video. So that's really sort of what I want to beat the drum on here, but happy to share how some of our NCAN member programs are doing that across the country throughout later. So thanks.
Yeah, and you could not have more beautifully set up Tamikia at Virginia Commonwealth University, because just the little bits I've gotten from how they're responding to what students are needing, it's so exciting. Will you tell us more about that, and then also how this resonates with you?
Sure. As Xenia was speaking, I was smiling because I said to myself, the fact that you're talking about really identifying that these young people come to us as whole individuals with life that happens outside of the classroom, that in fact, really affects their ability to be successful, and our ability to understand that as an institution is important. So I'll just tell you, the student voices resonated with me very deeply, because it sounds very similar to what our students are saying to us. We actually administer a non-cognitive assessment tool during the summer before students start their fall semester, so that we can understand more about their academic motivations, what risk factors exist, their receptivity to certain services and resources available to them. And there are two things that really stood out to us this year. One, the intentionality that the students have about wanting to learn more about careers and pathways to careers, I think resonates with the research that we heard. But the other is that many of them are less confident in their academic abilities than previous cohorts, but they also seem to be less receptive to help. And so, as an institution, when we think about that and think about the students that we serve, the question that we had is if a student really understands that they're struggling, or are they not interested in seeking help? But what we have come to is that we need to revisit as an institution how we set up help seeking. We know the questions that students should be asking that they oftentimes don't know to ask. And so instead of creating systems where the students have to come to us to ask for help, how do we design proactive systems of help, right? To make sure that we're supporting students. And I think that correlates with advice and guidance. How do we ensure we're providing them the right levels of advice and guidance, and then including them in that conversation so that they can learn the network of the institution, how it works. And as they explore more of the institution, they then have more questions. So that's been important to us as we continue to move forward. I think the other thing that I would say that we have seen a lot that resonates with me is that we're hearing students very clearly that they want learning opportunities that are flexible, that are applicable, and relevant to employers, not relevant to an institution because a faculty member enjoys teaching this course, right? And so they're not interested in just theoretical concepts to learn. They really want more experiential learning. They want the ability to be able to experience applying what they're learning in the classroom in real life so that they can showcase that they have the skills needed for these careers, but also that many of them develop a narrative that without that hands-on experience, they really don't know how to articulate what it is that this college experience has taught them. And so those are some of the things that resonate with me that connect back to some things that we're doing at VCU that I'm interested in sharing more about.
Yeah, I was really blown away by that idea of instead of having financial aid counselors, you have financial counselors, and it's for everyone, not just those students who raise their hands or have been flagged in the system.
Yeah, we actually, one of the things that we did, to your point, Janet, we've spent a lot of time over the past 7 years redesigning how we handle academic advising so that it's proactive, it's engaging, it uses data and technology to get in front of the students, to give them the proper advice, not just about what classes to take, but what networks to build, what experiences to be in. So then when we realized, what if we rethought how we engage with students with finances in a very similar model that we do with academic advising? And so that created our student financial management model, where we really think about our students' financial wellness and not financial aid counselors. And so we have financial counselors that are paired with academic advisors. Every student has one. That is the beginning and foundation of their care team. And that financial counselor and academic advisor work with that student to make sure that they understand what resources are available to them, internal and external, to fund their career, but also be financially healthy as a student. Some of our students have to work. How do we help them find employment opportunities, find funded internships? That has really transitioned what we think about as our culture of care as an institution, because we know finances contribute significantly to mental stress for our students. If they can't come to a classroom clear that their bill is paid or that they're financially secure, then they are less likely to absorb the material. And so we have really transformed how we engage with finances and partnered it with academic advising so that it is not these two separate units. Finances are a vehicle to make sure that the students are successful. And so that's been our approach to how we move forward.
Yeah, that blending across guidance, finances, connection to career, that holistic way of going. Does anybody want to add to what you're seeing or hearing from students on their like the way they're thinking about their paths is different. They're emerging into a world that is different. And I think if we all listen closely, they're telling us things that are going to help us transform higher ed.
Yeah. Janet, happy to jump in, but I'm seeing the unmutes and whatnot and trying to be cognizant of my other fellow panelists. Tamikia, when you were saying about the social supports and like how it needs to be holistic, Tacoma is looking at that, not just within the institutions, but also outside of the institutions, community-based, community organizations, families. My neighbor across the street who grew up here for 20 years and understands this neighborhood a little bit more. It's about cross-sector supports and individualized to every single student who needs and asks for help, right? So there was an effort right as the pandemic started around supporting seniors to their pathways. But typically, our networks are a lot like NCAN, for example, like a lot of, community-based organizations and whatnot. We hadn't opened it up to just families and the faith-based institutions and our workforce development council, or whoever that is, to individualize our supports based on wherever they were at. That could be, I don't know where I want to go, or that could be, I was going to go to University of Washington Tacoma, but I need to take care of my grandma, so I'm going to take a break. All of these reasons are valid and need to be destigmatized. I think that's the biggest thing about our role in elevating student voice, is to destigmatize a traditional narrative. There is no traditional narrative anymore. And we have shown, at least not just in our area, but in times of crisis, you can do whatever you want. You can respond in a way and in a manner that is responsive to the crisis at hand, that includes our institutions. And so a lot of these one-on-one based supports, now we have this community-based portal, which was developed by an NCAN member, Degrees of Change, who kind of owned the response to about a third of our senior class in 2020. And now we can kind of follow up with them, year after year. It isn't just about supporting seniors, it's about supporting any student along their journey in whatever year. That could be 5 years from now. That could be 10 years from now. We all kind of ebb and flow. And so that's one of the things that Tacoma is looking for, is a system that is responsive to each individual student based on their asks, right? Not forced down their throat, not based on a narrative that is traditional, based on what Elvin Buku needs at this moment in time. And we're not there yet, but the seeds have been planted, right? But yeah, holistic community-based response is what we're looking for in the form of social capital.
Well, really well said by both my co-panelists here. I think what struck me in one of the student videos was a young lady who said she now had the time to think about what she wanted to do, right, and be thoughtful. I'm not sure what to do with that necessarily, because it's also sort of who has the time, who has the luxury of time, right? There's a lot of controversy about gap year, right? When we talk about low income and first gen students and students of color, they don't have the luxury of a gap year. And we know that when they don't enroll, the chances of enrolling are reduced significantly. So that was just really interesting to me. I'm kind of just sitting with that one and trying to figure out what to do with that. But actually wanted to respond to something that both Elvin said and something that was in the chat about some of these really great organizations and programs and school counseling departments and institutions that have really great resources, really great programming, really great supports, but how we do that at scale, right? And how do we do that? I think the systems change piece is huge, Elvin, to your point. About the work that you all are doing in Tacoma, is that folks need to figure out how to come together and bridge those gaps with data sharing. Where somebody mentioned early alert systems. Tomiki at VCU, if an advisor learns that something's going on with a student, they've got to be able to figure out how to translate that to the professors, to the TRIO program that student might be enrolled into, the other success coaching program that they're a part of. And so really it's figuring out how we bring the adults to the playground and have them play together to really better serve students. I don't have the answer to that, but I know that NCAN specifically is doing a lot of work around that and really trying to connect our college success and access programs, with higher ed institutions, with their K-12 partners, to ensure that those transitions are happening seamlessly and that those supports are in place.
Xenia, as you were just talking, you and Elvin both, one of the things that it reminds me of is this conversation that we constantly have about creating programs, right, and support services for students, versus I think now is the time for us in higher education to think about kind of human-centered design thinking. That instead of trying to teach students to navigate the system that exists, that wasn't designed for them, now is the time for us to design a system thinking about our most vulnerable students, and then everyone thrives. And, how do we prioritize their needs? Understanding that traditional model of student is gone, right? Understanding that every student is individual, and how do we develop mechanisms to make sure that we're supporting their progress, I think is important. And that really requires institutions, I think, to be bold and to stop doing things that are not working and to figure out the things that are working and invest the resources there to scale them up so that they can best serve the institution across the board for all of our students.
I was waiting to see if Elaine would come off mute because I know we had a rollicking conversation about who gets to take a gap year. How do you respond? You've worked in this space for such a long time. What's popping up for you?
Yeah, I mean, so just echoing what others are saying, I think the big thing to underscore here and the innovations that are happening that Tamiki is talking about, that Elvin's talking about, is really, you know, the culture shift that's needed in higher ed and honestly K-12 and really in that partnership between the two. But we can talk maybe about the gap year stuff that's like, it's got some commentary on that in a different sequence. But, you know, what I'm thinking about is just how important it is for institutions to really think about the ownership that every person, every staff person, every faculty, and there's going to be a pushback on this. But if we really want to create that kind of student-centered institution or student-centered programs, that financial aid officer, that admissions person, that student services person, they all have to see that I play a role in this student's life and I have to be the one to help connect the dots for the student. So no more, you know, passing the buck. Not all institutions do that. And I'm drawing this really from talking with different administrators and program folks who are doing this work on the ground, because they've set up these systems where the person in a financial aid office will not let a student, you know, fall through the cracks and will make sure they find the right office that they need to get that form or to get that piece of advice. And so the sooner that we can start building that culture shift across institutions and across practices where everyone involved kind of sees themselves as playing a student-centered role and being some kind of advisor, I think is where we need to move to really be able to support students and respond to the types of supports that they need.
Yeah, I am so happy for this conversation to be developing the way it is. I wonder too, as we redesign and implement just concrete practices, one of the things that we'll talk about at the end of the session is that the chat is like flying by so fast and it's so beautiful to see. And of course I can't really pay attention to it, but you all in our series are always talking with each other about the practices. So one of the things I wanted to, spoiler alert, in October, we really want to come back for a 75-minute conversation where people come with the practices that they're doing and implementing and what they're seeing and what's working, so that we could create that space where it won't just happen in the chat, that we'll all be together talking about it. So I just wanted to give you all that knowledge. I would love if folks in the chat would start to add some of the things that they're doing and seeing. For the panelists, I'd love to hear more of the practices you're hearing about that are really promising for reconnecting people. And particularly, if you want to go this way, is how can we center equity so that if we're going to try to scale, if we're going to try to go broad, if we're going to try to do systems change, how do we make sure that the students who have been most disrupted are the students that we lift up and we don't lose them?
We seem to be going in this order, so I guess I'll just keep going this way. I don't know if I'm finding a rhythm.
Right on.
Yeah, so in Tacoma, collective impact, right, is the root of our model. But if we're not shooting at the same goal throughout the community, the programs that we create, the strategy, solutions, and whatnot, they'll be disjointed and siloed. It happened for us in a successful way with high school graduation over the last 10 years. Thinking forward, though, that 2030 goal is so clear. I mean, it took us a while to set that too, right? Now, because you have to have the right stakeholders, talking to students and families all the way up to our C-suite folks. But ultimately, we're shooting at 70% college completion and entry into a good earning wage job. So that language for us is very important because, again, as I was mentioning earlier, it throws a little bit of the why, the economic mobility type of language in there. But what happens next? A stated goal is just that, unless it's formalized, right? So one of the strategies we're looking to install is accountability measures across different systems by our executive suite leaders, right? So what are we signing onto, our organization included, in service to that goal? Things like, and it's been mentioned already, data transparency. Are we sharing data? Is it relevant and meaningful sharing too? Meaning it's not just on a website, so you can go check it out if you want. No, it's integrated into the practices and translated for folks who don't have as high of a data capacity or capability as others. There's resource alignment, right? So if we're looking at our institutions and our community-based organizations and our school districts and whatnot, our alignment of resources in flowing in the same direction. And then who are we serving? Primarily, targeted universalism is kind of our, it's a broad, I mean, academic term, but are we focusing on our most minoritized students first and foremost? And that's baked into our goal as well. So I kind of start there. All of our programs and solutions flow off of that 2030 goal and that accountability metric kind of framework that we're presenting out. And we're right in the middle of that right now. In parallel, a ton of great programs, right? I mentioned some of these senior supports, direct social capital, direct to students. That also has to happen at the same time. But it's our role as the Foundation for Tacoma Students to kind of hold center on it, right? This universe of incredible supports across sectors. It's hard to navigate, right? And each institution has their own goals. So it's been about a year and a half long process to recenter the goal that I mentioned, get our executive leaders across systems on board, and now engage our networks and leverage the strengths of our community-based organizations who are already doing incredible work for those students of color and those impacted by poverty. But it's a multi-layer collective impact approach that is hard to explain in about 2 minutes or so. So I'm gonna pass it on.
You know, Elvin, I think as I think about the work that we're doing here at VCU, I think all of us have some similarities. I think for me, when I think about centering equity, one of the things that I believe has worked here is our mantra that we really are committed to every student's success, right? And I think it goes back to something Elaine said, that, you know, there has to be a commitment that every student that is here deserves to be here, and we're going to ensure you are successful. And that means that we see the student as a partner. We see that they have skills based upon their experiences, life experiences, that really position them to be successful well, and not view them from this deficit model, right? Which I think is important. And so that commitment to student success really means that as we're thinking about how do we design programs and support services, that we are trying to do that, understanding who we care for, and that they are not just a commodity that we produce for society, right? That we are educating individuals that have life experiences that from diverse backgrounds that can further solutions to society. So one of the things that in that commitment to success, we've been really committed to focus on our faculty engagement. Because students spend 60 to 70% of their time in the classroom, and we have all of these external supports, but if that experience in the classroom is not going well, then it's a struggle. And so we have really focused on engaging faculty, making sure that they are working to build relationships with students. That when they see behaviors that identify possible risk, that they report that, not to just an advisor, so an advisor can follow up, but they touch that student and say, hey, Tamikia, come talk to me. We need to talk. And that relationship is important as students move through this time. I think the other thing I would say, as far as us centering on commitment, centering on success for all of our students, we've moved to something called the REAL experience at VCU. It's relevant, experiential, and applied learning. And every student that will graduate from VCU will have one, right? Because if you think about the value of experiential learning, oftentimes students who are working because they have to work don't get a chance to participate in internships and co-ops and service learning because they have to work. And so we are really thinking about this from an equity perspective. If we build this into our expectations and our curriculum, not extending time to degree, but how then do we provide those experiences for students, even if they're micro internships, even if they're micro service learning opportunities, even if it's if work study designed on campus is a valuable experience, how are we intentional about that to make sure every student has that experience? I think that centering on equity is important, because if we don't, we have the potential to lose more talent. That's what the whole equity agenda is about. And so I think it's important that institutions, that we have to rethink how we do things.
Really great thoughts from both Tamika and Elvin here. You know, I think really what I'd like to contribute is that we've really got to flip the switch on the data sharing piece. I'm no expert on data privacy issues, but I figured if Google can figure out how to share my profile and my website views with all kinds of other people, that our states and our communities can figure out how to share FAFSA completion data and National Student Clearinghouse enrollment and completion data with schools, with partners, with community-based organizations. And that's really what we've got to do, both, you know, in terms of getting the students into post-secondary institutions, certificate programs, what have you. We've got to really track and figure out where students are going and what's happening to them. Are they completing? Are they transferring? Where are they going? How long is it taking them? And so many people have access to this data and don't know about it, don't know how to use it. Like you said, it's just posted in a website randomly, and they're not using it. They're not utilizing it. They're not implementing what they know. They're not using it about how they advise students. There's just so much that we can do with the data, where you can catch students early if you know FAFSA completion is low. NCAN, shameless plug here, has a really great FAFSA tracker that you can drill down by community, by school, to see where FAFSA completion rates are. It is data out of the FSA website, the government website. So that's the data we have, but I'm talking about the point where schools are getting student level data, and that's what they need in order to call young people out of their class or whatever, free period or what have you. Get them to do that FAFSA, because we know that FAFSA completion is such a huge marker to, will this young person enroll? Will they have the financial support that they need? So really, I think that's really what I want to say is we've got to figure this out, and it's about, you know, policy change, systems change, putting pressure on our education systems, our higher education systems, our institutions, our districts, to really get on the same train and start doing some of that sharing to really help students enroll and complete.
Can I jump on the data thing? Because I just, like, you're speaking the language here. I love, and NCAN, you are a major source, honestly, of our data here locally. Qualitative data matters. The student voices that we just heard right here. We also did a locally sourced by Degrees of Change, actually, student voice research project for students who had stopped out in good academic standing. So are we disaggregating to that level, like specific slices of students and their individual stories? Because that also needs to be a piece of the data, qualitative and quantitative. And ultimately, what are we doing with that? So one of the most exciting things in Tacoma, we talk about student-centered all the time, but a lot of times we're like, oh, how do we prepare the student? And all of our energy goes into the student like that. We should be looking at our systems. How do we prepare our systems, including the employer, who is at the end of the road there, to be employer ready, basically, student ready to intake and develop and, you know, train up this next generation here. That's often been, at least locally here in my experience, a missing piece, right? That employer engagement. So if we're talking about career pathway programs into the medical field, for example, do we have our K-12, post-secondary, and local medical, you know, institutions a part of these pathways, right? Thinking about competencies, and not just for the student, but for the staff at hospital A, right? So that's some of the work that we're trying to do from a systems approach, but it starts, Xenia, to your point, about sharing data across all of those institutions, across sectors, in a meaningful way. But sorry, I had to jump on that.
Well, Elvin, I'm right behind you, because I fully agree across sectors, but I think even across offices and departments in an institution, right? I mean, we have so much rich data that we can identify when students need us based upon knowing what's happening in housing or with student organizations. And so being able to break down those barriers to really utilize the data in impactful ways, and also not to think you need some fancy, sophisticated system to be able to do that, right? You really need some good data folks who can pull robust data sets for you. And then how do you then use that data to inform approaches, right, on an institution's campus? But I think the second part to what you said, which I really appreciate, is bringing industry leaders into the organization to inform how we really engage students and develop them for the end of the pipeline. I think that has happened in some areas like business and engineering where they have strong relationships. I think oftentimes it's a struggle in humanities. But helping employers connect with the institution to really share what are the skills that they are looking for, because oftentimes development of those skills supersedes any major. And so if we focus on developing the skills and then track the data for post-graduation outcomes, it goes back to the value proposition. We have a better story to tell when we can say that X percentage of our students get a job and with a livable wage, right? And so that data cycle is comes full circle.
I would just add quickly to thinking about this employer engagement piece, which is so critical. And that's very much something that we heard students speak to. And that gets back to how do we center equity in this too? Because one thing we heard from students is this thought like, do I just have to guess? Do I just have to guess what an employer might want? Because I don't have that connection coming into it. So bringing employers into the classroom, taking the guesswork out of what students have to do is a way to build social capital. And I think really advance equity by making that connection to the employer really, really concrete.
Definitely. And it's so is what we heard from the students. It's how the system has to be ready to pull them forth. I wanted to give the students the last word of sharing this, and it perfectly dovetails with everything all of you just said. So Nicole, can you run that last video? It's super quick.
Just ready for my career, really. Like although I'm really interested in education and learning more skills and opportunities, I'm just ready for my success. I feel like I'm prepared for it and I'm just waiting for the next step. And I feel like I don't need to wait because I'm stepping into it by going to college, by researching these opportunities.
I love it. This research project has been so inspirational, and then seeing in the chat and knowing how much action is happening in the world of higher ed, employers, connection to career, we really wanted to make sure to make that space. So you are all invited to continue the conversation in October, 75-minute peer learning workshop. It'll be on October 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we'll put a link to the registration in the chat. We really hope that you'll join us and be able to connect with one another. And we'll share the link as well. Tomorrow we'll share out the slides, the report, the recording. But thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to our guests today. I could talk for hours more. This was a wonderful start to such an important conversation about reconnecting students and then connecting them not just back to enrolling, but to completion, to beyond, to their lives where they're ready for their success. Thank you. I hope that everyone will continue the conversation from the chat. We'll connect you. And I could not be more excited to have higher ed in the hands of people like the people on this call.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.